Hi, Chef Ammu. Thank you so much for joining me. Priya, I'm so happy to be speaking to you today and learning the story behind Tokri and what you have been doing there and how long you've been there and kind of the vision and everything that is behind it. So how about we start a little bit and you tell me a little bit about that?
Okay, so Tokri was actually created as a result of the pandemic
Mm-hmm.
last year. My previous business was DC Dosa, which was inside Union Market in DC, and that shut down during the pandemic because it didn't lend itself to a lot of delivery and takeout. So I launched a concept called Tokri, which is India's comfort food. It's called Khichadi. It's if it's one food that unites all of India, that you could truly say it's India's national food, it's khichdi. What khichdi is, it's a combination of rice and lentils. Now, from north to south, east to west, people use different kinds of rices, different kinds of lentils, different kinds of spices. So, depending on which part of India you're cooking in or you're from, your family would make it in a certain way. For example, khichdi was my family Sunday meal. Every Sunday, my mom used to make it. We all used to sit and have a late lunch and have khichdi and yogurt on the side and a few of the eggplant fried fritters. That was just a Sunday tradition in my home. Um, so when the pandemic hit and I thought I couldn't do DC dosa anymore, I was wondering what I would launch that would kind of bring comfort to people, but also to myself in a way. So I turned to khichdis, and I thought this is such a great way to eat. It's basically um, a complete meal in itself because you've got the rice, you've got the lentils, and there's always some kind of vegetables mixed in with it. So you have your vegetable protein, your plant-based protein. You have your starch. Of course, typically we use brown rice or red rice, and then you have your vegetables. So then I started playing around with different concepts about how I wanted to present it. Tokri in Hindi means basket. So I kind of extrapolated that and put it down to meaning like a bowl. So turkey like a basket, like the women carry on their heads,
Yeah.
with fruits and vegetables. So I just brought that down, narrowed, distilled it down to a small little turkey that you could have your khichdi in. So that's how turkey got started, and we're at Ghost Line, which was again created as a result of the pandemic, only mostly delivery and takeout and very little eat in. So that's how Turkey got created.
Mhm. Very cool. And so that's how fun is that? I mean, how much I just learned from just what you said about that. So
Yeah,
I read it's so that's soul warming, but you're right. You still maintain that vision, that mission that you've always had, even
right,
in this next iteration of what your craft is and how you
right,
show that. Um,
right.
and so with Kitchery, so I read that it's your grandmother's recipe that you use. Is that
It's
or
my mom's, it's my grandmom's. Like
yeah?
like all the moms and the aunts and the grandmas used to like compete. It's like, no,
Yeah,
this is the way we make our khichdi. This is
yeah,
the vegetable we put in it. Oh no, we don't do it that way.
right.
Typical little thing going on. So
Uh-huh.
my mom made it a little differently from my grandmom's recipe was a little more elaborate.
Hmm.
It had three different kinds of lentils in it. My mom's just had one basic 'cause she had three girls she was running after.
Yeah.
So it was pretty basic, and she used to put cauliflower and spinach in it. So
Uh,
yeah, but they're all based in different family recipes that I just kind of cobbled together, and
mhm.
what looks good, what tastes good,
Yeah.
what smells fragrant. So those were all the senses that I was trying to hit with the food I created.
Got it. Yeah, I get that sense too from so the menu. I mean, like you mentioned, if you look at it, it's kind of a grain bowl. Then there's the side, and so you
Right.
offered So tell me a little bit about the cultural story behind some of those menu choices that you decided to make as
Sure.
your own. Inspired by your
Uh,
mom and your grandmother.
So khichdi in India, depending on where you are, because India is actually all these different countries within one. It's like a little Europe. I mean,
Mhm.
the you go from north to south, east to west. The language changes, the people change, the culture changes, the food changes, everything changes. You don't feel like you're in the same country sometimes.
Mm.
Uh, so, for example, where my dad was from the north, from the Punjab region. My mom was from the west, which is where Mumbai is, which is one of the big metropolitan cities in India. So we had a mishmash of food growing up, but typically khichdi is served with a side of a liquid yogurt based hot. It's served hot. It's called a curry. It's not curry, it's curry. It's a yogurt based with, and it has little dumplings in it. So when we first opened, I served the khichdi with that. But having like a hot yogurt dish was just too much for people to understand what it was. Of course, the Indians understood because that's the typical way, but everyone else was like, it's yogurt and it's kind of thinned out and it's hot and it's got dumplings in it. It tastes delicious, but I'm not sure if it's a soup. But you're supposed to eat it with the rice. That's the one. The second traditional thing that's it's always served with is homemade achar. Achars are pickles, which is it's it's not the pickles the way you think of it. It's like steeped in vinegar. These are achars that are steeped in oil. They're preserved in oil. So you have mango, lemon, lime. It's put in mustard oil with a lot of different spices, and you just need a little pinch of it just to add some flavor to your khichdi. So those are the traditional items, and the third is the raita, which is the yogurt based. The raita, I'm sure you might have had it in Indian restaurants.
Mhm.
Um, any kind of like a tomato, cucumber, any kind of raita is served with it. So what
Mhm.
I decided to do was make it more friendly because a lot of these items were just really not understood by people. And I understand that these are traditional foods. So I made sides to go with them that are typical Indian food, like the cauliflower, the potatoes. Auntie's potatoes is really my aunt's recipe that I used to crave daily, and I decided to start making it on my own.
Mhm.
The black chickpeas was I wanted to do a variation on the typical chickpeas you get everywhere. Salads because you wanted to add a lighter element. So everything I've created may not necessarily be a khichdi accompaniment, but
Mhm.
it's an Indian food accompaniment that we typically have in India. Not necessarily with the khichdi, but also I wanted to balance out the plate, the look of it, the flavors. For example, we have a cabbage and daikon salad because the khichdi is soft in texture. So I wanted to add a little bit of a crunch texture, but it's got a tamarind dressing, which is typically Indian. So I try to like put things together that I thought would go well together visually, texturally, would taste good together. So that's how I put Tokri's menu together.
Got it. Yeah, and that kind of touches on some of the defining qualities of of Khichdi, having it
Yeah,
there at your restaurant, but also how it kind of represents. Um, you touched on how the recipes and the presentation and the tradition and culture behind
yeah.
it, and so the fact that you do meld, because I've heard that too, is that where Bombay is very cosmopolitan.
Oh, it's like New York City. It's like
Yeah,
Manhattan. It
right.
really is. Yeah,
So even within that, there could be
yeah.
so many just
Oh,
versus
completely.
a village or something,
Yeah,
or some other way
yeah,
of making it in another region.
yeah,
So you know it's almost like it becomes this palette, and the way that you described it is you found a great, very curated way of representing all of that
right.
through your offerings and making it seasonal. So it's a rotating. You rotate
Yeah,
that menu.
like we're gonna do like in the fall we do a pumpkin khichdi or a squash khichdi.
Okay.
In the spring I might do something with green peas if we get really fresh English peas. The difficult thing about I guess there's always this debate about representing your culture. What is authentic, right? What do you consider authentic to, or I'll have Indian people say, oh, this is not traditional, or and there's a difference to me between traditional and authentic. You can take the traditional ingredients and make them in a way that's still authentic, um, but it doesn't mean you're not hewing to where the food originally harks from. And it just irritates me when people say that. For example, when I don't know if you ever came to you, did you ever visit Union Market in DC?
No,
No,
no.
so I had a dosa concept. Dosa is a South Indian crepes, lentil crepes.
Okay.
Uh, so Indians used to say to me, "This is not really authentic. It tastes great, but it's not authentic." Now,
Mhm.
by whose yardstick are you measuring that?
Right.
Every ingredient, every spice that goes in is an Indian spice, or maybe I take liberties. I use Chinese eggplant instead of the traditional, the large Indian eggplant.
Yeah.
Um, but that shouldn't make a difference, and that shouldn't
Mhm.
dilute the quality and flavor of the food you're serving.
Right.
And I think the message gets really lost in that when people just try to dig
Yeah.
in a little too deeply. I mean, it's and don't just enjoy it for what it is.
Yeah.
That's just always been my thing. And we're always so quick to give labels to everything. Oh, this isn't authentic. Oh, this isn't genuine. Oh, this isn't Indian. But
Yeah.
I think a lot of that is really good. It's superfluous. I don't believe in that.
Yeah.
I really don't.
Right, right. Well, even you speaking to that, you mentioned that the country itself is so diverse. So
Yeah,
even, like you said, the way it's prepared in one household. So if you look at
yeah,
your doors walking into one household, is that's the way your
right,
household prepares it, and you happen
right.
to be a restaurant, but
Yeah,
it's your household, and also depending on where that perspective comes from.
right.
Looking at how you curate the menu, so it's all you know it's almost the same thing as what someone might experience just walking into someone else's home or like another family's home. But I totally get what you're saying is that it's still it's taking the essential qualities of the culture, which is, the culture itself can only be sensed, right, and seen
Right,
and
right,
and
right,
and
right,
smelled, but the way
right.
that it conveyed differs. That's what makes it different from one place to another, and from one
Right.
house to another, and one region to another. So it's great when, like you said, when people can get beyond the labels that they maybe conceive in themselves,
Right.
and are able to um, see something agnostically, for what it is, just kind of like
Yeah.
for what it is, and appreciate it for what it is. So I feel
Right.
like, yeah. So the way that you offer that curation and that seasonal, you give that chance for the culture to circulate, to give. It's almost like giving every region its
It's
place
due.
and its
Like, for example,
opportunity, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
For example, okay,
Yeah.
so the three khichadis I have featured that we've
Hmm.
been serving for the last 6 months. One is the spinach khichadi. Now, spinach
Hmm.
khichadi is typical in Western, and it's kind of like it's in a state called Gujarat, okay, because they're vegetarians, they eat a lot of vegetables, and they bring in fresh pureed spinach to add to the rice to give it the color, texture, as well as a
Hmm.
little more nutrition.
Got it.
So one of my kishies is the spinach base. The
Hmm.
other is one that I grew up with from the north. It's got cauliflower in it, large pieces of cauliflower with red rice. But the red rice is from the south. It's not from the north. It's a typical rice from the south. The other one I created was a coconut khichdi, which is cooked in coconut milk, and that was
Yeah.
just something that my granny used to make. It wasn't khichdi,
Hmm.
but she used to make a special pilaf, as they say, it
Hmm.
cooked in coconut milk. And I'm like, I want to do it, but I want to do it with black lentils and a special kind of, it's like a sushi kind of rice, like a
Yeah.
sticky whole grain rice.
Hmm.
So these are all authentic elements, but the way of putting it together is something that just makes for deliciousness. And it doesn't have to, like I said, it's like when we
Yeah.
start attaching labels
Yeah.
that it just, to me personally, it's offensive and it's just
Yeah.
irritating. And I'm just like,
Right.
I'm not, and that's not to say my food is fusion. It's not
Yeah.
fusion. I'm not a big
Yeah.
proponent of fusion food. I'm not
Yeah.
taking, like khichdi and
Yeah.
making like arancini, the Italian
Yes.
rice
Yes.
bowl.
Yeah.
I'm not doing that. Okay. It's
Right.
just not my thing. But there's
Right.
enough to play with, and there's a massive flavor profile. There's 100 different kinds of rices and lentils and vegetables that I can play with. So what
Right.
if it's not something that you consider khichdi? Just try it and enjoy it. That's what it's about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's being an artist, and it's like you're showcasing a gallery, and that
Right.
gallery rotates, but you're true to the medium, and
Right.
you're, so at the end of the day, it's still there.
Exactly.
Um, so I totally get what you're saying, and again, it's part of that, the education, and people allowing themselves to let their guard down a little bit and just
Right.
give it a chance.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
So
totally
yeah,
understand.
I think we're too quick to label,
Yeah.
and I
Mhm.
understand that comes with a sense of comfort because you
Yes.
always want a referential point, like, okay, where is this coming from? But if you look at all the
Mhm.
Indian restaurants in not only in DC, even in the US, they all do North Indian food. They don't do any other parts of Indian food.
Mhm.
And for people to even try to understand that, it's so complicated.
Mhm.
I try to simplify it as best as I can because it is complicated. It
Yeah.
is such a
Yeah.
plethora of offerings, and you just try to distill it down to something that makes sense and tastes good.
For sure. Yeah. And it sounds like that's what you do, with the
I
menu.
try.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Yeah.
the other question, actually, speaking of the traveling, because you just touched on something very important,
Yeah.
is a lot of people, when they think India, they don't realize, like you said, how regionally diverse it
Yeah.
is. So let's get into just traveling a little bit. Traveling to India, where and when have you been over? And what are some of your favorite things to see or do when you go there? And then the last part of that is, when you think of when you're coming back, what sticks with you in terms of the spirit or way of life of people that you feel like reinvigorated when you come back into your restaurant? You want to carry that through.
Yeah. I go a minimum of once a year. My mom still lives in Mumbai, so I try to visit her. She doesn't travel a whole lot. I try to visit her at least once a year. And every trip that I take to India, I try to go to a different region because and every time I go to the south, the north, the east, the west, I find foods and flavors and vegetables that people are cooking with that I didn't even know existed. And I spent the first 19 years of my life growing up in India. Now, granted, I grew up in Mumbai, which is, like I said, it's like growing up in Manhattan. But still, to find out that these are Indian foods being cooked by maybe some, not necessarily all in the cities, but even in some villages, or or a type of vegetable that I've never seen. Or, for example, in in December, a lot is ruled by the climates, the seasons, the geography. So there's some vegetables that'll only come in be in season like for a few weeks in December. So then people take that and make a special dish that's only available in December or in the spring. And I love that. I love because it harks back to the essence of cooking with what's fresh and what's available. Um, I always try to do that when I go back to India, and I try to bring that back with me when I come. That let's cook with what, and it's not, you know what? Honestly, it's not always doable. It's not always feasible.
Yeah.
It's not. For example, take for instance ramps. Ramps have a really short season here. Like they grow like what for 2 weeks and then they're gone, right? So during those 2 weeks, it's easy enough to say, "Oh, I really want to capitalize and do something." It's not always that easy to do, especially now when pretty much everything is available all year round
Mhm.
in terms of produce. But I try to bring some of that back with me in terms of, okay, they're cooking with this because it grows in the fields near where they live, and it's freshest and it's best at this time of year. Do you see what I'm
Yes, I
saying?
do. Yes.
I I try to bring that back, but honestly, like I said, it's not always easy to apply it.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
though that's the credo, that's what you're trying to stick to. In America, it's totally different. Like in Bombay, when I go to the vegetable market there, it's this massive, huge vegetable market with all the fresh produce laid out that's available for that day, that season, and it's easy. We don't have that kind of outlet here other than in farmers markets. What are you going to do? Go to Whole Foods or Safeway or Giant, and you're at the mercy of what's been produced, what they're putting out.
Yeah.
literally, you
Right.
know.
Yep.
And for my next venture, I would love to set up something where we have relationships with local producers that you can get, because they need to earn a living too, that you can guarantee them that you would be buy X amount of produce from them, and in return they would be growing that for you. So unless you do something like that, you're pretty much at the mercy of what's available on the wholesale vegetable market.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. I
yeah.
I understand that. So, but the fact that you still attempt it through
I
kind of the
try.
seasonal, yeah,
Yeah.
the seasonal
Yeah.
approach to the menu, and you have your base, like you said, the khichdi and the sides,
Yeah.
and you couple
I
that
try to vary that. Yeah.
you're right, right. But then on top of that, the fact that you're mindful, of that. So when you think about, and actually this gets into the last question is when
Yeah.
you think about what about India is evoked through the senses that you use to transport people, whether it's through obviously, the smell of the spices, maybe the sounds of the cooking, the ambiance, the decor, all of that. What do you feel facilitates their, you know, in addition to obviously curating the ingredients themselves, facilitates their ability to experience India?
I think the most, it's the sensory perception, that's it's the aromas.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the first thing when you travel in India. And for me, because I'm personally, I have a very sensitive palate and a sensitive sense of smell. If it doesn't smell right, then it doesn't taste right to me. If it doesn't smell right, I'm not going to eat it. And I think about Indian food, it's the thing about it is it's very nuanced. It's layered. It's many layers of flavors, and it can be a little overwhelming if you don't know what you're doing. But I think it's the aromas that first hit you. Now, to be honest with you, Indian food is not pretty to look at. When you look at it, it's just it's not pretty. Okay, let's just, it's like rice and it's curries, and it's the rice. It's like it's not pretty. It's not, you don't plate it prettily. You can try, but it's home style Indian food. What I want to give people to eat is not restaurant food. I don't do
Yeah.
restaurant food. I want to give people food that I grew up eating, that this is what people make in their homes. If, take a dish like butter chicken. What percentage of Indians do you think it's like the national dish of England? What percentage of Indians do you think make it in their homes? Not even on a weekly or a monthly basis. None. And it's mostly up in North India. So when you
Mm-hmm.
take items like that, it's just you have to parse through the rubbish. But I still think, getting back to your question, it's the aroma that first hits you. And then once you bite into it, it's the flavors and the textures. It's visually, like I keep saying, it's not appealing unless you
Right.
dump a whole bunch of cilantro on it, which is like on everything right now. But it's really not. But that's not what it's about. That's not what
Yeah.
draws you to the food. There's a
Yeah.
warmth and a depth of flavor that you're not going to get in any other cuisine.
Right. Yeah, and that's a very salient point because, while it might appear culturally it's more muted, but there's so much, like you said, so many layers in that. So when you think
Yeah.
about it, it's not just things on sitting on top of each other, just throwing things where
Um,
maybe in other cultures, but it simmers and it stews and it,
right.
it there's a purpose to that so that the aromas are extracted, and so it to use your words harkens to the culture and the
Yeah.
way that things are done, and that slow home style way of cooking that you know um, the approach may not be, it's not a homogenous way across the world, you know what I mean, like so people, everyone to understand that and learn
Right.
that is really
Right.
important.
And a lot of the cooking evolved from, like, don't forget, people didn't have, like, they
Yeah.
used to cook on coal stoves or on outdoors on wood fires. A lot of people, and that's the village style cooking, which is actually really delicious because it's so simple and it gets you down to the basics. But
Yeah.
so a lot of cooking evolved around that process, because it's not that easy to get access to gas, or like what we're so used to is an electric stove or gas. It doesn't exist, so people adapted for that. They
Hmm.
cooked around the limitations that they had, and they came up with some amazing food.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like that comes out. You do a very good job, I think, of like I said, curating that. So I want to thank you for sharing that
Oh, I
story.
want you to come.
And
Yeah, I want you to come and taste the food. Anytime you're back in this area, just send me a quick message on Insta. Say you're here. I'll feed you. Trust me. I,
oh,
I
you're
would
so
love to
sweet.
feed you and your family. Of course,
You're
anytime.
you're
Really.
very kind. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I want to encourage everyone in the DC area, to
Right.
come and try Khichadi and try your newest concept at Tokri there, and to really
Right.
get to know the flavors and the culture and the craft behind what it is that you do.
Right.
And and I wish you a lot of success
Thank
in
you.
this venture and the next one that you have planned as
Oh,
well.
thank
So,
you. And thank you for giving me a platform to talk about
of
this.
course,
I want to spread the word, spread the good eating, right? Yeah.
absolutely.